Hello everyone, welcome back to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe and experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining now in studio is world-renowned psychic, Eddie Connor. Thank you for supporting our sponsors, Conscious Life Expo, by going to consciouslifeexpo.com to get your tickets for their 2015 event.
And take your mind on a literary journey and travel over to adventuresunlimitedpress.com to purchase books from our famed experts featured right here on Truth Be Told.
The mysteries in the culture of ancient Egypt have been in question for thousands of years. How were these pyramids actually built? Who built them? Was it humans or could it have been ancient astronauts?
Well, we're going to find out because we'll be speaking with author Stephen S. Mehler about Egypt, the pyramids, and the mystery behind who built them. Stephen's fascination with ancient Egypt began at an early age and has guided his passion about it for most of his life. In his studies, Stephen has authored 2 books, The Land of Osiris, and also From Light into Darkness, The Evolution of Religion in Ancient Egypt.
And Eddie, I think it's so fascinating to talk about the ancient religions and the gods of Egypt, where people at this age and this culture served and worshipped. And Eddie, did you know that Stephen also researched the ancient crystal skulls since 1979?
That's going to be fascinating. Now, that's one of the things I absolutely want to ask him about, and I'm sure your listeners do too, Tony. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help us welcome author Stephen S. Mehler.
Oh my gosh, the crowd goes wild.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How you guys doing?
Well, first of all, I have to say a belated happy birthday because Stephen and we actually share the same birthday. I'm a little older than him, though. So.
Oh, no, not quite.
Well, thank you so much for joining Eddie and I here on the show. It's an honor and pleasure. And this is one of our favorite subjects to talk about is Egypt and the ancient Egypt, especially because most people don't get the chance to travel to that part of the part of the world, and this is, for thousands of years have been the mysteries, of the pyramids and the pharaohs and all this wonderful stuff that you got to research.
Yeah, and the controversy around it, the mystery that surrounds it. Yes. You have this one group that's like, the aliens did it, and then you like, the humans did it, the slaves did it.
Right.
So there's actually more controversy and disagreement than there is agreement and standard accepted fact.
Well, let's go back and start from the beginning because this is the first time you've been on our show, and I'm hoping this is the first of many. And we want to find out how you got started in your journey of your fascination and then also your research of
Sure.
Egyptology.
There you go.
I got it. I was sitting there trying to say it earlier.
Well,
I couldn't get it.
It's a long story, but we'll give you the short version.
Okay.
All right.
Around the age of 8, and this is important for your other co-partner to hear too. Around the age of 8, to my mother's blessed memory, again, I'm dating myself. I'm 25 years older than you are. I grew up in the late 40s, early 50s. And in my house, my mother carried the 2 great pictorial magazines of the day, Life magazine and National Geographic.
Yeah,
same here.
But we always remember certain events in our life. Around the age of 8, I clearly remember opening an issue of National Geographic and stopping dead on a picture of the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid. Something happened. Now, at the age of 8, I could not articulate what was happening. I could not even understand what was happening, but I just could not take my gaze off of that image. And I know now that the Sphinx made a deep unconscious connection to me. And this is the key to my whole understanding of the subject. And we'll say she, and we'll return to that. The Sphinx is a she. And so she has guided me all my life. She guided me in all different directions. Now, I clearly will say it wasn't at that age, at 8, I said, I have to become an Egyptologist. I have to study this ancient culture. No such thing. But it did get me to start to question things I was being taught in school, question religion, question what parents were saying, question what governments were saying. Mm-hmm. And so I decided then that science was where I was going to go. Science was purportedly a field of objective truths, not subjective like the other areas we mentioned. So I decided to go into the sciences. And as you mentioned, I have 3 degrees in the sciences, and I am a qualified and credentialed field archaeologist and prehistorian. But along the line of going into academia, I began to realize that it was a similar system to the others, that it was a control system. It wasn't an open, objective display of facts. It was very subjective, and there were paradigms, there were controls. So I realized I had to go beyond science, and that led me into the field of mysticism and spirituality. I got involved with the Rosicrucian Order, Amark in San Jose, California in 1978. I got involved in the Rosicrucian tradition. I got involved in the many different metaphysical schools. This eventually led me to self-teach, self-taught myself Egyptology. I spent many, many years in the library stacked at San Jose State University reading all the great masters of Egyptology. There's Petrie, there's Budge, there's Gardner, all of them breasted in America, all the ones that people know. And still there was something lacking. Something was wrong. When I got involved with the Rosicrucians were saying, oh no, there was a much different Egypt, a much more higher spiritual Egypt, and pyramids were not tombs for kings, etc., etc. That led me on that path. It was through that path that I eventually, and again, this is the long story made short, eventually came to realize that there was still a living tradition in Egypt. Again, as I always mention when I talk to people, sometimes it's a series of people you meet, and one person I'll mention in this talk with you guys is the great George Gurdjieff, who wrote a book called Meetings with Remarkable Men, and that I've had that same life. Certain individuals really put you on the path. Certain books that come your way change your life path. And it happened to me in the 1990. I came across a book, actually 1992, a book by a British author named Murray Hope, who was an occultist, a Wiccan priestess, and an alternative Egyptologist. I believe she has left this plane now, but I contacted her in the 90s. She wrote a book called Ancient Egypt, The Sirius Connection. In this book, she talked about the fact that there was still a living tradition in Egypt, an oral tradition of masters who kept the ways for thousands and thousands of years, didn't fall into academic or religious paradigms, and still kept that old way. And I knew then I had to connect. And also something that happened in 1987, again, with this field of crystal skulls that I was involved with, and that could be a whole other show we could talk about.
Oh yeah, you'll be back for that.
We'll answer any questions you want about that too, because I looked at them, as I have done anything else, as ancient artifacts. There are many people who believe all these crystal skulls were modern carved, they're fake, they're forgeries. That's what you'll see on History Channel, or you'll see the Smithsonian say. I investigated these items as genuine ancient artifacts, which they are. And so we can talk about that. But it was in 1987, attending San Francisco Life Expo on a panel about crystal skulls, I met a man named Toby Weiss. He was he was one of the first people to start groups taking spiritual tours to Egypt in the 70s and particularly in the 80s. He did it through the 90s and 2000s. The group was called Power Places Tours.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you know him.
Yes.
Good. Well, I met two people who were working for him, Dr. Ruth, who has passed away, bless her memory, and Harry Hover. And they told me, once we started talking and they got to understand what I was about, they said, you have to come to Egypt with us. We have a particular tour guide we use. He's one of these old wisdom masters, old teachers. He knows the old ways. And they just mentioned the name Hakim. And it sat in my mind. I have to meet this man. So 1987, to skip to 1992, I discovered Murray Hope's book, The Living Tradition. I believe this man must be part of this living tradition. So it was a series of miraculous events. The money was made available for me, and I went to Egypt for 3 weeks in November of 1992. That is 22 years ago. And in the upcoming, in those interceding 22 years, I've gone to Egypt 18 times.
Oh,
so
wow.
And led many tours. But the first day I was in Egypt, I hooked up with a woman, and we're going to discuss more about her because there's a lot of stories interconnect here, a woman named Nikki Scully, who also leads tours to Egypt. She's written books. She's very famous. She was leading a tour group. I hooked in with her tour group, and she was using a tour guide, this man. His name is Abdul. His name was Abdul Hakim Awiyan. Everybody knew him as Hakim. He was the senior tour guide in Egypt. The first day in Egypt, I saw him standing in front of the Sphinx. I looked at her, I looked at him, and I always used to make this joke when I would speak with him because he would get a kick out of this. I would say I couldn't tell who was older because he had one of those faces of a million years of wisdom. So I joke, I couldn't tell who was older. He is the Sphinx. He used to laugh at that. But she told me right then, because she had led me, she said, this is the man you've been looking for all your life. This is your teacher. This is my son. So that began 16 years of study and tutelage with this incredible man. He had already had the system evolved, the system he was teaching, that there was a previously very highly advanced Egypt way before what we call dynastic Egypt. Prior to 10,000 years ago, they built the pyramids as machines, not tombs, and they carved the Sphinx, who is the oldest of the old. And he gave a date of the Sphinx of 54,000 years. Just calmly threw it out. Just calmly said this and calmly said that. And he would say things like, my masters taught me this, my masters taught me that. And I was catching, this man is not a Muslim. He is saying very interesting things. So he did a tour of the museum with him. I pulled him on the side and I said, Hakim, I have to ask you. He said, yes. Are you part of the oral tradition? He said, of course. And I said, how did you know? I said, I read a book from Murray Hupp. Oh, Murray. He knew her too. So that began this tutelage with this amazing man. And he had this system. I just put the label on it. We call it Kemetology as opposed to Egyptology. We define Egyptology as Greco-Roman mythology. Nobody ever asked the indigenous people of Egypt what their history was, what their traditions were. Some of the Muslim Arab authors have come closer than modern Egyptologists, European and American Egyptologists have, because a lot of the great Arab writers of the Middle Ages talked about the Great Pyramid being pre-antediluvian, being built before the flood.
Wow.
So we call it Kemetology because Kemet was the name. And I'll just bring this out and then we can go from here. Chem was really the name of the land. Egypt is a Greek word. Egyptos comes from a term, Egyptos. It only referred to one site, which is the site of Memphis. Kemet meant the black land, or Chem. Actually, it was Chem, but the T ending came later when we had feminine and masculine endings to terms. It was Chem, the black land. It represented the dark, rich alluvial soil that the Nile she deposits every time she floods. It was the basis of the civilization, the land, the food, the water, everything. So Chem was, and interestingly enough, one of the earliest Arabic terms for Egypt. It is today called El Misr, El Masri. Misr is the Arabic term for Egypt. But before it was called that, it was called Al-Chem. And it is where the word alchemy comes from.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
First of all, you need a little more energy.
And excitement and passion, right?
I told you it was going to be a sad show.
Right. This is so fascinating. I mean, because I've never heard this side of it before.
No.
Most people hadn't. Most people. He was teaching these things, like I said. He was the most active tour guide. He was 56 years a tour guide. He was one of the first class of tour guides. Egypt went through a major revolution in 1952 when the generals overthrew King Farouk, and which was a British monarchy, and so finally became an independent nation. And that's when they started issuing licenses for people to guide. So he was in the first class of 100. He was number 56, and he was a tour guide for 56 years. When he passed this plane, in August of 2008, he still had an active tour guide license.
Well, one thing that really stood out to me when you said the pyramids were not built for tombs, but they were built as a machine.
Yes, and here we can bring in a colleague, a great friend, another person that you may have interviewed or should put on your interview list, a man named Christopher Dunn, D-U-N-N.
We have not, and I will.
This is a man who's been interviewed by everybody everywhere. I mean, he's been very prominent featurely on the Ancient Aliens show, which I have not, which we will discuss why I have not. But Chris has been on Ancient Aliens many, many times. He is 50 years a master engineer and craftsman. He actually worked in the space age industry, was recruited from Great Britain. He's a Brit by birth. When he was 19 years old, to come to the U.S. to work in the aerospace industry. He is a master of engineering and manufacturing. He was invited to Egypt in 1985 by two names I think you will know, Graham Hancock and Robert Bouval and John Anthony West. Right. He went and did a video with them in 1985, went inside the Great Pyramid, looked around and said, my God, this is not a tomb, this is a machine. And he went then to back engineer the Great Pyramid. And it resulted in his 1998 classic book, The Giza Power Plant, where he classified it as a machine, as a power plant. He has since written a great follow-up volume called Lost Technologies in Ancient Egypt in 2010. They're all on Inner Traditions, Christopher Dunn, D-U-N-N. Highly recommended. So Chris and I are great colleagues. He's the one that came in. Hakim predicted that it would be the engineers, the geologists, not the Egyptologists, not the archaeologists, who would come in to transform the tradition, and they have. So Chris came in, he looked at the Great Pyramid, back engineered, said it's a machine. Exactly, and he took the tolerances in machining. We look at tolerances in granite that these ancient people did that Chris measured to maybe perhaps as far as 2/10,000ths of an inch.
Wow.
that is not called for in manufacturing today. Today, to do something in granite, the most it's called for is a 1/4 of an inch tolerance. Now, it can be done today, but it is not cost effective. It would take the highest diamond tools, the highest CAD machines, the highest advanced machining to do what we see these ancient people did, supposedly with a Bronze Age, Copper Age technology.
Yeah, I'm almost speechless because like what we're so taught in school and what we've taught, like you said, on the History Channel, on certain channels, National Geographic, and growing up, this is not what we hear. And but there's always that little place in your heart and your soul that you know that it's not the truth.
Yeah.
And I know Eddie and I both feel this way, that there's so much more bigger things out there that we're just not either being told or just even being discussed, because it goes against complete of what history has already been written.
I always have found for myself in the course of my life, when a universal truth hits you, it hits you in the body, not in the mind. You get the hair on the back of your neck stands up. Everything, you start to have goosebumps, whatever. Those are the type of things that have hit me in my life, when someone has said something to me that moved me profoundly to my core. It bypasses the conscious brain and goes directly to your being.
I agree with that 1,000%. And that's why I say, when you hear, as you say, a universal truth, or you have an impulse or a feeling or a sensation, you'll always feel it in what I call your gut brain and in your heart mind.
Right.
And you just know that you know that you know it's a truth despite what you see and what you're told.
Beautiful. And that leads to me one of Hakim's greatest teachings. It is an expression that we use in the field. And again, we're going to talk about the fact that I lead tours. I'm leading 2 tours next year to Egypt, so we'll talk about that.
Yes.
And have done that for 20 years. He had this expression, yakini, yakini. We don't even have spelling for it. He always said it's the pronunciation, it's the sound. He was very big on sound.
Vibration.
And so what it means is, one yakini has to do with protection. The other yakini has to do with knowing. So basically, it's an ancient expression. How we translated it into English is, I am protected by the second yakini means positivity. Okay, first means protection, second means positivity. And he'd always said, it's said the same word, but saying it twice in one breath changes the alteration of the second one. Say yakini, yakini. It's the same word, but saying it twice, positive and protection. What we came up with is, I am protected by the power of my positive. Meaning, the only things we know are what we have experienced directly, as we've said, into our being. That is our truth. That is our knowing. That protects us. We are positive of that. No one can shake us from that. So that is our protection. So this was like a mantra that Hakim would give us for anybody who feels that they're being psychically attacked, when they're under duress, under stress, when you feel you're being doubted, when you know you have to return to your core, your center. Yakini, yakini. I am protected by the power of my positive. I know what I know, and that knowing protects me.
You know, I think it's fascinating to hear you, because as I hear you, I get to feel your energy, and so does Tony's audience. And you vibrate this enormous amount of super high frequency, because it's a purity and it's a passion that you sort of exude from yourself, Stephen. And
Thank you.
You are, and tell me if this makes sense, I feel you're one of the most grounded people I've ever met, who has this ability to traverse physical and non-physical simultaneously, but without getting swept up in the woo-woo part of it as much. Right. And then summoning that non-physical energy to you and through you as sort of a modern-day alchemist with thought, feeling, and frequency.
Thank you very much. That's beautifully said. And you actually know that I worked at the Rosicrucian Order in San Jose, California as a staff research scientist. And what I did professionally was test people like you. We didn't use the word psychic. We hated that word. We used the word sensitive, because that's something that everybody could relate to. We all are sensitive to every degree. We've been taught, especially like in the last 30, 40 years, that people we call psychic are specially gifted people. They're born that way. And of course they are. And no doubting of that. But they're different than everybody else. No, we're all born this way.
That's right.
Again, I'll give you another Hakim universal teaching. He taught that we're born with 365 senses. Oh. So if we're only using 5, What does that
Wow.
say about us in the modern world? Hakim used to lecture with me, and he used to say, "Now I want to, he'd say to me, no, I'm not trying to offend anybody. I don't want to offend anybody, but we are crippled today. We again, so we use, and this is the point because you were talking about the gods and goddesses of Egypt.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one of the first great scholars, and if you're ever interviewed or know the term John Anthony West,
Yeah.
he is a champion of of an Alsatian mathematician philosopher named R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. Schwaller was the first one to question the term netter, usually written NTR because they didn't write. Again, the ancient Egyptian language was really the forerunner of modern Hebrew. So vowels were not written; they were sacred to be chanted. They were sacred sound. So there was no science for vowels. We just intuit the vowels in there. So it's usually written Neter, netter, pronounced netter. Usually the glyphs are just NTR. So how has it been translated? Well, it comes from Champollion, from the early translations of the hieroglyphs, from Wallace Budge, a keeper of the British Museum in the 19th century, who defined the term as meaning deity, meaning god or goddess. So this has come with a modern idea that the ancient Egyptians worshipped hundreds of different gods and goddesses. Schwaller was the first one to question this. He said, no, nectar does not mean the whole. It does not mean deity. It's an aspect of a whole, a cosmic, the divine principle of creation. Hakim took it even further and said it is a sense. Here we come with the term as above, so below. There cannot be any divine principles used for creation that are not part of the human body. In fact, this is what Socrates taught when he taught know thyself. If you know the functioning of the human body, you know everything there is to know about the universe. And so basically, we're born innately with 365 senses. 180 we label feminine, 180 we label masculine. But that is what people think were the gods and goddesses of Egypt. They're not. They're cosmic principles. Isis was a principle. Osiris was a principle. Horus was a principle. Hathor was a principle. And also a sense that's in us, an aspect of consciousness. In other words, we're only taught to use the five senses. So we only speak the language of the five senses. Hakim used to say in lecture, someone will say, I saw a dream last night. He said, no, you didn't. Your eyes were closed. You were sleeping. There is that old expression from the 70s, still popular today. It was very popular among African Americans. I hear you, man, meaning not with the ears, meaning a consciousness.
Yes.
I hear you means I grok you. I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
So here's the point. We only have the language of the five senses. So that's why we have all these other senses. We call it the sixth sense. We call it PSI. We call it psychic ability. We call it this. We call it that. But they are things we all have. And what part of Hakim's teachings, and I am continuing with him with the Kemetic School of Chematology, which we'll give the website, is to continue that, to wake people up. That is the whole goal of our work. We have been asleep for 5,000 years. Part of the other thing we're talking about is cycles, that we don't talk about things moving in a straight line. One of Hakim's greatest teachings were the cycles, and we'll talk about the 5 stages of the sun, basic cycles. But this is how we move in cycles. So we're coming out of the low end now. We've been asleep for 5,000 years, and we'll talk about why. And now it's time to wake up, and we need now to get the language, to have the terms for these other senses, because it's coming out more and more. I once gave a lecture in front of 400 people where I said to the audience that people are going to be waking up in the middle of the night and know something they did not know before. And I looked in the audience, and there was a woman giving an elbow to her friend. See, I told you. And there was my confirmation. Because this is what's happening. You guys see it all the time, I'm sure. I mean, it's hard to be in this modern world. We look at what's going on in the world today, the wars, the violence, everything that seems so negative and down. And we miss the little tidbits, sometimes buried in the news. That's why I scour the internet every day. I look for anything archaeology. I look for anything that's found. I look for any positive signs, what's going on in the world, because they're buried. What we have in the front by the media is the negativity, the fear, the control. But what's buried in the news is the signs that show that people are waking up all around the world. Yesterday, in Lima, Peru, there was a march. That's one of the greatest marches of the last 50 years, was not carried on the media at all, except for Democracy Now! On PBS. It was a march of indigenous people from all around the world complaining about the global climate summit that was there in Lima, and marching against the multinational corporations for raping and destroying the land. There were people from Ecuador, Venezuela, from Peru, from Philippines. They were from all over Africa. They were from all over Asia. People from Canada, Australia, and Americas. It was an incredible march, not even covered in the news, but it was there. And it's a sign of what Hakim said, the phase we're going into now, the awakening. So our goal, my work, the work of the people I'm involved with, is to try to wake people up, to understand that we are much more than we've been taught we are. And our history, our past, is much more than we've been taught it is.
And not only is it, we absolutely love you. Just flat out, we love you, and we want more of this. And there are people all over the world right now who are getting to slip into that frequency that you're exuding, that's so high, fast, and pure. But this other thing about the 365 senses, I've never heard it. I've been a metaphysician.
360. 300. 5 days. And actually, they would have a calendar where they would have a netter for each day. So they had a calendar of 360 days. Then they would take 5 days and they would celebrate all the netters. So in ancient Egypt, even in dynastic times, they would have at the end of their calendar year 5 days. Everybody stopped working. Everybody partied for 5 days. That's the way to live.
Right?
Yes, yeah. It's the way to live, and it's the way to integrate it. Don't you feel like, Stephen, if we had more of those 360 senses and we were aware of them and we were implementing them in our daily life, we would not be as unconscious as we are right now, and being somehow... this is going to sound like conspiracy theorists and propaganda. I don't mean it to sound that way, but this is what I see on one side of it, and then I see what you're saying on the other side, which is my favorite. And that is, there are more people believing what they're told because they're not trusting their heart, mind, and their gut brain via the 360 senses.
Exactly. And this is what we could talk about in terms of the cycle. It is a fact of the cycle we're in. Let's talk about that quickly.
Yes, let's do
One of the basic teachings of chematology is what's called the 5 stages of the sun. It talks about the sun's movement 5 different times during the day, a daily cycle, but it also represents development stages of our consciousness, also represents cycles in our prehistory. So we have the 5. The first is Khepr, the scarab beetle. Everybody knows about the scarab beetle. It's called the driller. Why is it called the driller? Well, first of all, the scarab beetle is a hermaphrodite, both male and female in one body, both lay eggs. When it lays its egg, it takes the egg and finds a ball of dung. Usually in Egypt, it would be camel dung, donkey dung, and puts the egg in the dung and rolls it in front of it, so that when the new one is born, it has a fresh source of food. What's waste for one is food for another, a law of nature. What's waste for one is food for another. So it immediately has a food supply. So the ancient Cometians, and we call them Cometians now, were looking at this, but they also observed like pushing the ball of dung in front of it was like bringing the disk of the sun up at dawn. So that's why the scarab beetle becomes dawn. That's the first phase, the beginning consciousness. That's when we first begin to develop consciousness. Second stage of the sun is Ra. Wait a minute, somebody says. Isn't that the name of the sun god? We say, boom, no, thanks for playing. No. It's only 1/5 of the understanding. Ra was the sun at noon. Really? Ra represented adolescent stage of consciousness, also called the stubborn. Before there was the concept of the donkey, in ancient Egypt, it was the ram. Ram being a very stubborn, hard to deal with, hard to train animal. So the symbol of Ra originally was the ram. And so that was the stubborn. And it represents, again, the adolescent stage of consciousness. When we're teenagers, we think we know everything. So that's stage. True. Third stage, when the sun starts to move across the afternoon sky, is called usually written O-O-N. It represents the mature stage of consciousness. It's called the wise. It's one now where it represented, usually depicted by a man standing straight up with a staff. It's maturity. We've reached a mature state of consciousness. We are wise. The fourth stage of the sun is called Aten, or Iten. And this is going to come to a whole topic of my second book, because you want to talk about religion, and we will. Aten represents the wiser, usually depicted originally by an old man on a staff, the wise man. Later became the sun of the disk sun with 3 rays coming down with the Ankh at the end of it. A particular king named Akhenaten, who we're going to discuss. So Aten is the wiser. It is the sun in the full stage of its flowering in late afternoon, when it is at its full height of consciousness. It is when we are using 360 senses. It is the fullest state of consciousness. Now, important, the fifth stage. Excuse me. Fifth stage is called Amen or Imen. Familiar name, Amen, Imen. And it means the hidden. It is night. There's no image. It's darkness. And it's characterized by dichotomy, by splitting up, by different ideas, hidden. Things are hidden. Now, when I usually give a lecture, and of course, this is a very sophisticated audience, and usually sophisticated audiences catch it right away. I usually stop here and I say, now, of the 5 stages of the sun, which stage do you think we're in now? And like you say, people who've been duped by the media, who've been duped and don't think for themselves, oh, we're in the highest stage, of course. No, we're in Amen. We're in the lowest stage.
Wow.
And Amen is where you get the last 5,000 years, the rise of what we call the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. You have the idea of dichotomy, us and them. There's racism, there's races, there's nations, and the last 5,000 years are characterized by systematic, institutionalized warfare. Saying that, I'm not saying there were not wars before 5,000 years ago. Definitely, as long as there's always been humans, there's probably always been skirmishes, conflicts. But systematized, institutionalized warfare does not exist before dynastic Egypt, before 5,000 years ago. So this is where we are. Patriarchy, patriarchal religion, patriarchal ideas, dichotomy, us and them, wars. So we're not in the highest stage. We've been asleep. This is why we say we've been asleep for 5,000 years. And what is it characterized? By the control of religions, by the control of media, by the control of governments. Just like you said before, we're told what to think. We're told what to believe. And we're discouraged for thinking from ourselves. This, again, has been 5,000 years of darkness. And the time is why Hakim was given the okay from his masters to release these teachings for the West. And he found me, and I'm blessed that he found me. I was the son he always wanted. Not only did he treat me as a disciple student, but as his oldest son. I mean, his family is my family. I go and stay with them in Egypt. He had 8 sons and 3 daughters and over 25 grandchildren. They're all my family. I go there. I can stay there. If anything should ever happen to me where I need a place to stay and someone will feed me, I can go to Egypt. And so he made me his son. And that was what was so incredible about these teachings. And so we are coming out of Amen. We call this period now the awakening. This is why you guys are doing what you're doing, why there's so many blog talk radio shows, why there's what's going on, even Ancient Aliens, why there's all this alternative energy and information still keeps coming down. The more they try to suppress it, the more it comes up. Because one of the things Hakim taught us, the more things that they try to hide, the more it comes up. Nothing is ever completely hidden, he would teach. It always manifests in one way or another. And how these teachings are manifested is, again, the oral tradition. By small pockets of masters, adepts, enlightened beings, men and women, have kept this tradition for 5,000 years, knowing that because of the powers that be, they could be executed. And again, I was involved with the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians were put to death at the stake by the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. The Catholic Church did its best to wipe out all of these type of systems we're talking about. But they didn't succeed, and they never will succeed. Darkness cannot defeat the light. Light always comes in and chases the darkness away. And this is where we are now. So this is why we're doing, why we're talking, why we're sharing this, why we're talking to your audience, to have them just to think a little bit. Wow, he said something that struck me, just like you guys have said. Something hits you, I want to read more about it. I want to learn more about it. I want to know more about that. That's what did it to me, and that's what does it to other people. Something hits you, and you just say, well, wait a minute, I don't believe what I'm being taught. There's something else going on. Always when I would read about ancient Egypt, something else was going on. It was not until I sat at the lotus feet of Abdul Hakim and heard these incredible teachings and amazing wisdom that he had that I realized my path was right. And there it was. And we used to refer to him as a walking library.
Wow.
I have a question, because can these stages also be broken down into an individual?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Because when I'm looking at this, I can almost I was drawn to almost for what I feel the stage that I'm in.
Exactly.
And I feel stage 3.
Do you ever hear the expression in biology, ontology recapitulates phylogeny? It means the development of a species is reflected in the development of an individual. When we're embryos, we're fish, we're amphibians, we're reptiles, and then we become mammals. And it all goes through our embryological stage. You're exactly right. We as individuals go through these 5 stages. Hopefully, we get to Aten in our lifetime, and Amen is when we're gone. I mean, that's darkness, we're gone to the other side. And again, interestingly enough, there was no word for death in the ancient Cometian language. They had no word for it. The term was westing, or going to the west.
Yep.
And that's why we talk about Hakim, we say he wested in August of 2008, because they didn't see life and death as dichotomy. No, it's only life.
That's
only
right.
life and only changes of form.
Absolutely. And if you're just tuning in, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with author Stephen S. Mehler. He's written a couple of books. One is called The Land of Osiris, and the other one is From Light into Darkness, which is the evolution of religion in ancient Egypt. We are fascinated by everything.
It's one of my favorite shows, by the way.
That's what I was getting ready to say, but I didn't want to hurt anybody else's feelings. I'm like, this is my favorite show ever. And our next guest is Deborah Ann Clement. She is an astrologer, and she's tuned into done a chart on the United States. And so much of everything you're saying is about these 5 stages where we're in, how the consciousness is waking up, and you cannot suppress the soul of anybody. That energy of the soul will always come back up into the light in one way, shape, or form. And I believe that any group, whether it's political, whether it's religious, in any way, shape, or form, if they are suppressing humanity for whatever selfish reason that they have to do it, they will create their own, quote, hell to pay, as it were, because there's such thing as karma. So our work is to keep getting the information out that you're sharing with us, Stephen, and
Great.
to have them, people who are hearing it, to wake up like you did when you were 8 years old and you saw that picture, and then the hair stood up on the back of your neck, and you just knew that you knew that you knew, and then all of the doors and windows throughout the universe opened and kept putting you at the right place at the right time, so you could perpetuate this limitless enthusiasm with Tony and I, and of course Tony's listeners. So we thank you for that.
I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share it, because knowledge and information is useless if it stays within a person. It has to be shared.
That's
Amen
right.
to that. And I'm gonna go to these stages again and bring in the census again. Now, the pharaohs of Egypt, how? Because they were considered gods, many of them, and so.
Okay, let's stop right there.
Okay.
Second
Educate
level
me.
of teaching. Second level of teaching of chematology is what we call the 5 purs.
Okay.
Per means house.
Okay.
First one, per-a, meant the high house. The Greeks, coming in, being a patriarchal civilization,
Right.
looked at that term, high house, and they saw fathers and sons. And that's all they saw. The term is not true.
Really?
Per-a, the high house, represented the woman's house.
Really?
First thing, I did this even before I met Hakim. Again, on my journey, I have 2 master's degrees. My first one was in human ecology, which I got involved in archaeology. Second was a social sciences. It was in the women's studies department, San Jose State University. I was a flaming feminist in the 70s. It was the role and position of women through the women's studies department in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was a matriarchy. I knew this 20 years before I met Hakim. A matriarchy. Descent went from mother to daughter, not father to son. So I say here a definitive statement. There never were any male pharaohs.
Really?
I say it again. We all use the term wrong. There never were any male pharaohs. The woman was the ruler. The woman was the one by whom she consorted, and they had no word for marriage. They had no word for husband or wife. You hear Egyptologists all the time talking about the queen being the great royal wife. There was no word queen. There was no word wife in their language. So the only term we can use is consort. And the woman chose her male. So who is it then? Well, wait a minute, people say. Who's the statues then? Who's depicted on the walls? Well, again, you have a system that was matriarchal, that is becoming patriarchal, and I can discuss with you in detail how the system was up. It really was a theocracy. It was the priesthood, priestesses and priests, that ran this civilization. They aligned themselves with wealthy families, powerful warrior families. Those were the ruling families of Egypt. And so whoever is depicted on the walls was usually the male head of the family. Later we could say king. You could even say, not in the early days, there were not even kings. But in the later days, with others, Ramses II, blah, blah, you could use the word king. But never pharaoh. Per-Ah was the high house, was the woman's house. So in other words, you have Ramses II, and his consort was Nefertari. She was the Per-Ah, not him. So that's number one.
Wow.
Number two, we have the term Per-Ka. Per-Ka, Ka is a term that I could go on lecture for hours with you. It's actually, we define it as the physical projection of the soul, the personality, that which stays in the tomb. So the Ka was worshipped in the tomb. The Ka was something they would set up offering to, even though it was not the physical body, which is Khat. A T ending, Khat, spelled Khat or Khet, meant corpse or body. Was like the personality.
Right.
So that was the tomb. The Per-Ka is the house of the Ka. That is the tomb. Next was Per-Ba. Ba is the spirit. Now, we don't say soul. We'll talk about that again if you'd like. But we say spirit. So spirit, the place where you go to raise your consciousness, to realize that you're more than body and spiritual. So that is your temple. Per-Ba. Now, the key understanding. Per-Neter. Remember we talked about Neter.
Mm-hmm.
Mistranslated terribly. Per-Neter, the house of the Neter, also becomes the house of energy, the house of nature. Because, again, the Greeks coming in as the first Western civilization to come into ancient Egypt, they see these things, they hear the term Neter, they pronounce it Neter. Neter. So sometimes you'll see some of the Egyptologists actually not write it N-E-T-E-R, but N-E-T-C-H-E-R. Neter. Well, then come the Latin-speaking people, Rome. They align themselves with the Greeks. They hear the Greeks pronouncing this term Neter. And the Greek word, physis, is where we get the word physical or physics meant nature. That was the physical world. But the Latin-speaking people hear them saying Neter, and they come up with the word natura, which is nature. So the pyramids, by definition, we said Per-Ka was tomb. By definition, the house of the Neter, the house of nature, the house of energy, a machine.
Wow, no wonder that's why it's so important that I love that you will scour the internet instead of looking at the headline news so you can see consistent evidence and proof on this planet that we're waking up and that we're moving back into that cycle of nature, that part of us that is organic, as it were.
Sometimes buried, but I'm an archaeologist. I know how to
You know how to find.
Absolutely. Stephen, we're really able to see with just the information you're giving us. So we're able to get kind of a sense of why you might not have been a guest on Ancient Aliens so far, but we would love to know why.
Oh,
Yes.
no, I'm going to tell you that. This is good because I want your audience to know this, because I have been misunderstood. Sometimes I come out and people think, oh, you don't believe in any of that stuff. You think, no, I am a believer. Again, around the age of 8, I had an experience. I grew up in New York City, particularly the Bronx, New York. I remember around the age of 8 going up to the roof. I used to always love to go up on the roof at dusk, at twilight, and look at the stars, look at the sky. I loved it. It took me out of the New York environment. One night, I saw 3 lights in the sky, moving in formation. One with 2 dots behind it. I actually use that symbol when I sign my name sometimes. And moved across the sky and then make a 90-degree turn to the right. And at 8 years old, I knew these were not normal aircraft.
Yeah.
Something's going on there. So I always was a believer. The movie that impressed me the most when I was a kid in the 50s was The Day the Earth Stood Still. Not the Keanu Reeves version, the Michael Rennie original version. And that movie impressed me. The aliens are us. We are the aliens. They look like us. The only other movies with the little green men and the monsters that were scaring people, which was purposely put out by Hollywood in the 50s to put people off the trail of it, to make people scared of the whole alien phenomenon. That is what has been happening since. It is another controlled medium to make people scared. We're going to worry about Star Wars. We have to fight ourselves. They're going to come, Independence Day, all the other ones that have come up, Transformers, all of this is to keep people scared, but not The Day the Earth Stood Still. He was almost human, and he gave a message: stop fooling around with nuclear energy, blah blah blah. So it impressed me. So I've always been a believer. I, for years, was a person who interviewed. Again, I don't use the common terms. I didn't call them abductees. In fact, people who are in the field don't call them abductees. They call them experiencers. And I came to the same conclusion that the late Harvard psychiatrist John Mack came to. That these people were really believing that something was going on, that they were not making this up, they were not delusional, and they were not mentally ill. Something happened to these people who believed they had these experiences. So there's something there. So I was always in the 70s and 80s, up until the 90s, In fact, I met Zecharia Sitchin. We can talk about that.
Oh my
I
God!
was a believer.
Wow.
I was a great follower of this. When Zecharia Sitchin's books first came out in the 80s, I was a big follower. I really was a believer. I am not anymore. I believe I called Sitchin a one-trick pony. All he ever saw, and he was very literal. Never saw anything symbolic. Everything had to be literally translated. And many, including myself today, Sumerian scholars believe his translations were incorrect. So there's a whole school of people who follow him, and we think his translations were incorrect. That the Sumerians were never saying that the Anunnaki were aliens who came down to Earth. They never said that. So this is a whole understanding. Again, that's what's going on. So this is why I turned down Ancient Aliens, because I believe they actually asked me for the second season on the Egypt show. They asked me for the fifth season on a Crystal Skull show, and I turned them down both times because I believe they're distorted. I don't care for the guys who run the show. The first half hour of Ancient Aliens is usually great. You have great scientists like Chris Dunn, like Brian Foster, who I work with as my colleague. And then the second half of the show is usually garbage, where it's all aliens and nothing else could be blah, 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 blah. So I stay away from the field now because I think it's a distortion. But if you ask me, did Hakim? Yes. All the indigenous wisdom keepers around the world say we are starseeds. All the indigenous traditions say that this is a way station, that Earth is just an experiment from many different groups coming from many different star systems. And I totally believe that. And I don't believe it, I know it. That's the difference. Hakim used to teach, don't believe, don't think, know. Know it in your being, yakini, yakini. So I know we're star seeds. I know we come from different star systems, but this idea that we are slaves, the nine goals, the Anunnaki, is, again, Hakim would say, if you think you descended from slaves, then you always will remain.
Oh wow,
that is so
powerful.
profound.
That's powerful, yeah. To know that, wow, yeah. The people in the chat room are very interested. They especially when you said that the women were the pharaohs and not the men, and most of them are women, and like, yeah.
But
we can show it again. If you come to me, I can show it to you in the statues. I can show it to you on the walls how the woman has a prominent place, not equal to the man, but superior. And again, let's return to her, the Sphinx, because she is the Alpha and Omega. Why she's not a male king worshiping the sun is because her face is that of a black African woman today, first of all, but it's not even the original face. Hakim said, by tradition, she is called Tefnut. Now, their tradition is Nut, written N-U-T, is the universal principle. It's usually depicted as a woman, the woman of the sky, called a goddess, not a goddess, but she is the creative principle. She controls all that which is created, all that which is uncreated. So that's how this matriarchal understanding came. They didn't come thinking, oh, male and female, and we've descended from a male god. No, they saw creation was more feminine than masculine, not equal.
I believe that.
More feminine than masculine. So then they had this story. When Nut herself wanted to manifest on the earth, she spit. Tefnut means the moisture of Nut, or the spittle of Nut. She spit is where there was a limestone outcropping that they created the Sphinx. And she represents the Great Mother, an aspect of the Great Mother. Now, why Hakim would say, why they say saliva or spit is because every time we expectorate, to use a scientific term, it's different. It's never the same. It has no weight, no volume. Again, they're basically saying you cannot define the Great Mother, but if you must, we'll create a statue. And the statue was the Sphinx. And she is 54,000 years old.
54,000
Oh my God!
years.
So we have what, Tony, about 7 minutes left, but
yeah, about 10.
But we want to know. We want everybody to know about your tours, how to get in touch with you, what your websites are, Stephen, so that because we know everybody's just all a Twitter now, and they're like.
As you said, for videos, great site for videos. First of all, the main website is www.kemetology.com, spelled KHEMITOLOGY.com. It is the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism, something Hakim and I talked about in the 90s, that we should have something, a system to continue these teachings when we both are gone. And we said we should set up a school. But when he passed in 2008, his second youngest son, Yusuf, took up his father's mantle, married an American woman named Patricia Lehman, who's now Patricia Awian, who came to Egypt with me in 2005. They created the Kemet School. So that is the site. That is where we lead tours. We're leading a tour. And the second website is www.hiddenincavideos.com.
Oh,
Website of Brian Foster, who, if you've not interviewed, I can set up an interview with him.
Please, yes.
I just came back from 2 weeks in Peru and Bolivia with him. He is the master of the Inca and pre-Incan civilizations. He lives in Cusco and Paracas in Peru, married to Peruvian woman. He does the best tours of Peru. Work together. We do techno-spiritual tours. March 8th through 21st, 2015, we are doing a tour, the third annual techno-spiritual tour with Brian and myself. We connect Peru and Egypt. We believe the Egyptians went to Peru. We can demonstrate evidence of that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Also went to Australia, and we can talk about that too. It's on the Kemetic School site. We have retranslated what are called the Gosford glyphs, which all people thought were forgeries and fakes. They are not forgeries. They are actual legitimate Egyptians went to Australia over 1,500 years ago. 2,500 years ago. So, and we can show that the Egyptians may have went to Peru over 4,500 years ago. So there's the sites we're leading, and I'm also leading a tour with David Hatcher Childress of Ancient fame in October 2015. So they're all going to be on that website, the Kemet School website, and Brian's website is hiddenincatours.com. He does the best tours to Peru and Bolivia, and we have a great combination. We bring geologists, we have many scientists and lay people, spiritual people, psychics, all lay people. Everybody comes. We have an international group of people come from all around the world, and it is the best time for sharing and presenting all this where people can experience it. How Hakim taught me how to teach was by using both sides of the brain. It's not just enough to go there and say, oh, the glyphs mean this statue means this, the Sphinx means that, working on the left brain. You have to have the right brain. Hakim would do all his teachings, and now he'd say, let us sit and meditate. And we meditate and we connect. Because we say to you, every pyramid was tuned to a different frequency of sound. Every temple was tuned to a different frequency of sound. Every temple, every site is dedicated to one of the different 360 netters. So we go there, and in meditation, in chanting, in toning, using the sound, because sound was incredible to these people, you can experience that within yourself. That's how we wake up. We'll take you to the temple of Isis. You will experience her within yourself. Every man has Isis within him, as every woman has Isis within him. And the same at every site. That is how we teach. That is what we do. This was the uniqueness of Hakim's teaching, to give you the experience, not just give you the knowledge for your brain. The experience is what people take home. And believe me, it is a life-changing experience.
Before we get out of here, Maureen in the chat room says, ask Stephen to spell the phrase, and I think you said that this was made up. Kimi Akimi. Yakini.
Okay, it's in my first book, Land of Osiris. How I spell it is Yakhini. Because I like the tradition of the secret Dakini dances in the Tantric Asian tradition. So I spell it that way. Hakim said you can spell it Yakeni. Yakeny. Doesn't make a difference. It is the sound. The two things that Hakim made me concentrate on my research, because of my background, my science and my knowledge of archaeology, was sound and water. Knowledge of the two that the ancients had and the interplay of which. We didn't even get into that. But how were the pyramids built? They use sound to create anti-gravity.
Wow.
And let me just tell you, when I was in Peru, I've been there 3 times, Machu Picchu, Huayna Picchu, Cusco, all of it. What I would constantly feel, sense, and vibrate was a frequency of sound. And I would see in my mind's eye the boulders, or I would feel them, Stephen.
Exactly. Don't speak.
And I could literally experience them being lifted energetically, vibrationally by some thing, and it kept coming back to sound for me.
You would go absolutely bananas in Egypt.
That is on my things to do bucket list for my heart, mind, and soul. I want to do this.
Let me end with this teaching too, because wherever there is what is called a power place, a sacred site, a vortex, an energy site of the earth, there are 3 things present, always present: underground running water, a natural source of crystal, and what are called igneous rock, volcanic stone, which is high crystal. It is what creates the energy field of these sites, is the running water interacting with the crystal. That creates that vibrational field, why we experience these things, why everybody can go to the Sphinx and get something. Believe me, I have had men come to Egypt with their wives who were dragged by their wives, were not into any of this, thought it was all nonsense, garbage. I'd say to them, don't have to listen to anything we say. Just come in the Great Pyramid with us, chant with us, tone with us, experience it, the silence, whatever. Every single one of them tells me they had something, they felt something, something changed them when they would come home, and they had believed in nothing of this before they went, because the energy of the site is still active. Why you experience that in Peru is the same in Egypt.
It is. It is.
Well, I want to go with Stephen.
I do too.
I'd love for you to go with me.
Well, before we get out of here, we want to give you another invitation to come back, because there was so much stuff we need to talk about and didn't even
We could
touch on.
do hours and hours on crystal skulls alone. Believe me, anytime we can set this up, and even in the next couple of months, because again, before March, I'm really pushing this tour. We really want this tour to happen
Good.
because it is a great experience, and people come from all around the world, which is so wonderful.
Well, let's maybe in January or in February, because we're right before the Conscious Life Expo. We're going to be there 3 days live, and we'd love to promote you as much as we can.
And I can connect you with Brian Foster. He's somebody you should definitely interview.
Please, we would love that. And well, you deserve this.
Yay!
Thank you so much, Stephen Mehler. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And Stephen, go to hiddenincavideos.com or how do you say it again?
Kemetology.com.
There we go. And it's right on the screen, so you guys can check it out. And if you missed this, I know there's a lot of people said they tuned in halfway through. This will be up on YouTube and also on iTunes and Stitcher and all these places where you can catch up and kind of hear the impressive demonstration that Stephen gave us today.
And you do not have to be psychic, child, to know that it's going to be the most downloaded show on YouTube. It's going to get the most views of any Truth Be Told show we've ever done.
We are all sensitive.
That's right. All right, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you,
Thank
Stephen.
you very much, gentlemen. I enjoyed it immensely.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Wow. All right. Well, we don't want you to go anywhere because we have another great hour ahead of us.
Yeah,
go ahead and tell them who's coming up.
Deborah Ann Clement is coming up next. She's an astrologer, but listen, ladies and gentlemen, what she's doing, she's going to do an impromptu, wonderful reading for Tony. However, she's tuning into the birth date of the United States of America.
Woo-hoo.
She is literally going in. She's going to piggyback on what Stephen Mehler was just talking about, why all of the protests, why the rioting, why the destruction and everything that's going on in humanity and in consciousness, and why everything feels as tough as it is right now. She's going to go back and pull historical proof of that, and she's going to come from it from strictly an astrological perspective to help all of us understand it. So if this is like, she's the best person to be following Stephen right now.
Really, this is one of my favorite shows.
Mine too.
Everybody's been interesting, but the energy, the passion that he had today got me all excited. I'm very excited.
This is a man who he doesn't just walk his walk and talk his talk.
Right.
He lives in the core nucleus frequency of exactly what living in those 360 senses is really about, to be on the earth plane and a star seed simultaneously.
I'm ready to work on those senses. All right, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. We're going to be right back in just a minute with Deborah Clement.
Love it.